February 14, 1943. 18,000 feet above Bougainville in the Solomon Islands, Japanese naval aviation faced a new enemy, one that would soon dismantle their air superiority in the Pacific. A dark blue fighter, its distinctive inverted gull wings unmistakable even at distance, executed a vertical climb that defied everything Japanese pilots understood about aerial combat. It soared past 20,000 feet, then 22,000, still climbing with power to spare, while the vaunted Mitsubishi Zero, pride of the Imperial Japanese Navy, struggled at its ceiling. This was the Vought F4U Corsair. To American pilots it was salvation, but to the Japanese it would soon earn a terrifying nickname, Whistling Death, for the haunting sound of its wing root oil coolers in a dive. Within just 18 months, this single aircraft would not only dominate the skies, but also break the spirit of Japan's most elite aviators, transforming them from hunters into the hunted, from confident warriors into men who would sometimes avoid combat altogether at the mere sight of those distinctive gull wings. To grasp the psychological devastation the Corsair inflicted, one must first understand the near unshakable confidence of Japanese naval aviators in early 1943. These men were the survivors of the most selective aviation program in the world. The Okinawa Naval Aviator Preparatory Course accepted fewer than 2% of applicants. Training lasted 3 grueling years and claimed more lives in peacetime than the Americans sometimes lost in entire battles. By 1943, the average Japanese carrier pilot had over 800 hours of flight time. Veterans of the China campaign boasted over $2,000. These were men who had revolutionized naval warfare at Pearl Harbor, humiliated the British at Ceylon, and swept the skies clear from Burma to the Gilberts. In 1942, the Mitsubishi A6M Zero achieved an astonishing 12-to-1 kill ratio against Allied aircraft. Japanese tactics, refined since 1937, maximized the Zero's strengths: unmatched maneuverability, long range, and excellent visibility. In skilled hands, it seemed invincible. Doctrines emphasized individual mastery and aggressive spirit. Pilots were taught that Bushido, the warrior's soul, could overcome any material disadvantage. That belief had proven true against Chinese fighters, against British Hurricanes, against American P-40s and F4F Wildcats. Each victory reinforced the conviction that spiritual superiority and skill outweighed armor and firepower. So when the Corsair appeared in the Solomon Islands, it was dismissed as just another brute force attempt by America to match the Zero. Marine Fighting Squadron 124, VMF 124, brought the first 12 F4U Corsairs to Guadalcanal on February 12, 1943. Japanese reconnaissance quickly noted the new fighter's unusual design, the massive 4-bladed propeller, the elongated nose, the strange bent wings. 2 days later, on Valentine's Day, Corsairs entered combat for the first time, escorting PB-4Y1 Liberators in a strike against Kahili Airfield on Bougainville. The encounter would be remembered as the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, and though disastrous for the Americans that day, it marked the beginning of a revolution in the skies over the Pacific. The Valentine's Day engagement cost the Allies 9 aircraft for the destruction of just a single Zero. On the surface, it looked like another Japanese victory. But to the pilots of the Imperial Navy, the fight revealed something far more unsettling. These new American fighters did not fight like Wildcats or P-40s. The Corsairs refused to enter traditional turning duels where the Zero reigned supreme. Instead, they climbed above them, something no American aircraft had ever managed, and from that high perch they struck with blistering speed. Diving out of the sun, they hit hard, then used their massive velocity advantage to escape before a Japanese counterattack could form. Moments later, they would be climbing back to altitude, ready to strike again, while the Zeros below labored helplessly in pursuit. Soon, Japanese intelligence began assembling technical reports on the strange gull-wing fighter. What they discovered shook their confidence. At the heart of the Corsair was the Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine, delivering 2,000 horsepower on takeoff and 2,250 with water injection in combat. By comparison, the Zero's Nakajima Sakai 21 engine barely managed 1,130 horsepower. This wasn't just an advantage in power. It placed the Corsair in an entirely different class of aircraft. The disparity was most obvious in raw speed. The Corsair could reach 417 miles per hour at 9,900 feet. The newest Zero variant, the Model 52 introduced in 1943, could only manage 351. In a dive, the difference was terrifying. Corsairs routinely pushed past 500 miles per hour with full control, while Zeros risked deadly flutter at 360 and structural failure beyond 410. Climb performance told the same story. The Corsair could reach 20,000 feet in just 7.7 minutes, with a climb rate of nearly 3,000 feet per minute under normal power, over 3,200 with war emergency power. The Zero needed 11 long minutes to reach the same height, and above 25,000 feet it became sluggish, almost uncontrollable. The Corsair's service ceiling extended to nearly 37,000 feet, a realm the Japanese fighter could not hope to contest. And then there was firepower. The Corsair carried 6 Browning 50 caliber machine guns, each capable of unleashing 850 rounds per minute at a muzzle velocity of 2,140 feet per second. For Japanese pilots, accustomed to dueling fragile Allied fighters armed with lighter weapons, the sight of those 6 heavy guns blazing was not just lethal, it was psychologically devastating. The Corsair's firepower was overwhelming. Its 650 caliber Brownings unleashed a storm of lead weighing nearly 70 pounds per second. By comparison, the Zero's two 7.7mm machine guns and twin 20mm cannons managed just 13 pounds per second, and the cannons carried only 60 rounds each, barely 7 seconds of sustained fire. But it wasn't just about offensive power. Japanese pilots quickly discovered that the Corsair was nearly indestructible compared to their fragile Zeros. The F4U carried 155 pounds of armor plating around the cockpit, self-sealing fuel tanks and armored oil coolers. Hits that would tear a Zero apart often left a Corsair limping home, riddled with holes yet still flying. Many returned to base carrying the scars of hundreds of bullet and shrapnel strikes. This survivability changed everything. American pilots could fight aggressively, even recklessly, knowing their machines forgave mistakes. Japanese aviators had no such luxury. In their aircraft, a single error was usually fatal. The Zero had achieved its legendary maneuverability by being the lightest fighter in the sky. No armor, no protection, fuel tanks that burst like tinder. Its structure pared down to the absolute minimum. The Corsair proved that American industry had erased the old trade-off between protection and performance. The double Wasp engine provided so much power that it could carry armor, heavy guns and still outclimb and outspeed the unprotected Zero. It created a new kind of fighter, one that not only outperformed its opponent, but survived where others perished. The stage for this transformation was Rabaul, Japan's fortress in the Southwest Pacific, the most powerful base outside the home islands. Here the Imperial Navy concentrated its finest pilots and most experienced fighter units, determined to halt the American advance. But by late 1943, the balance was already tipping. When Major Gregory "Pappy" Boyington and his legendary VMF 214 Black Sheep Squadron arrived with their F4U Corsairs, the Japanese no longer spoke confidently of victory. They spoke of survival. On December 17, 1943, Boyington led 31 Corsairs as escort for a bombing raid against Rabaul. The Japanese launched 40 Zeros to meet them, their best pilots flying their newest machines. What followed would demonstrate once and for all that the era of the Zero was ending, and the reign of the Corsair had begun. The Corsairs climbed to 25,000 feet, an altitude where Zeros could barely maneuver. When the Japanese attempted to rise and meet them, the Americans simply dove through their formations at nearly 450 miles per hour, firing short, brutal bursts before zoom climbing back to the heights. The Zeros could not follow, could not force close combat, and could not escape. By the end of the engagement, 11 Japanese fighters had been destroyed for the cost of just 2 Corsairs damaged. But the Corsair's impact went far beyond performance charts. It became a weapon of terror. The aircraft's oil cooler intakes, buried in the wing roots, produced a piercing shriek in high-speed dives, an unearthly whistle that earned the name Whistling Death. Japanese pilots reported hearing it in their sleep, and some developed involuntary reactions whenever any similar sound reached their ears. Its appearance only deepened the dread. The bent gull wings gave it a predatory silhouette, unlike any other fighter. The massive 13-foot 4-inch propeller, the largest ever mounted on a fighter, added to its brutal image, while the deep blue paint scheme rendered it nearly invisible as it descended out of the sun or sea sky. American pilots exploited this fear deliberately. Sometimes they would make terror dives over Japanese airfields without even firing, simply to unleash the whistle. Boyington's Black Sheep Squadron painted snarling shark mouths on their Corsairs, completing the image of a predator that haunted the skies. By mid-1943, Japan was trapped in a terrible equation. Advanced American fighters like the Corsair were killing experienced aviators faster than Japan could replace them. Before the war, Japanese naval aviators received 500 to 700 hours of training before combat. By 1943, fuel shortages and aircraft losses reduced that figure to 150 hours. By 1945, desperate new pilots arrived with as little as 40 to 60 hours in the cockpit, barely able to handle their aircraft, let alone face Corsairs. For the veterans, the effect was devastating. They were forced to fly alongside novices who had no chance against the Americans, watching helplessly as they died one by one. The proud mentor system that had once produced the world's finest naval aviators collapsed under relentless losses. Experienced pilots who fought Corsairs in 1943 predicted with grim certainty what would happen once America's new generation of fighters filled the skies. Their predictions came true at the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944. There, F-6F Hellcats, sharing the Corsair's mighty double wasp engine and many of its traits, unleashed destruction on a scale never before seen in aerial combat. In what Americans called the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, 400 to 450 Japanese aircraft were annihilated against only 130 American losses. Many Japanese aviators never even saw the enemies who killed them, cut down by fighters they could not outclimb, could not outdive, and could not outrun. The personal accounts of pilots who faced the Corsair reveal the depth of Japan's psychological collapse, from confidence to pure terror. First Lieutenant Kenneth Walsh of VMF 124, the first Corsair ace, became a legend on May 13, 1943. Over the next 6 months, he scored 21 victories. Walsh later admitted that flying the Corsair made aerial combat feel almost unfair. Its overwhelming advantages, speed, climb, dive, armor, and firepower, reduced once deadly duels into mechanical routines. Climb above the Zeros, dive through their formations at speeds they could never match, fire a burst, zoom back to safety, repeat. The results were staggering. Lieutenant Robert Hansen of VMF 215 achieved 20 confirmed kills in just 17 days in January 1944. His ruthless efficiency shattered enemy morale so completely that Japanese formations often broke apart the moment Corsairs appeared. As 1943 turned to 1944, the Corsair evolved into even deadlier forms. The F4U-1A introduced a bubble canopy, water injection for bursts of combat power, and stronger armor. The F4U-1D could carry 4,000 pounds of bombs, more than many Japanese bombers, while still outpacing and outgunning every enemy fighter. Japan scrambled to respond. The Zero Model 52 was reinforced with armor and self-sealing fuel tanks, but the added weight stripped away its only true advantage, maneuverability, without granting real survivability. The new Kawanishi N1K George showed promise, but unreliable engines and fragile hydraulics doomed it. Then came the F4U-2 night fighters. In 1944, 36 Corsairs were fitted with APS-4 radar pods, giving American pilots the ability to hunt in darkness, once the last sanctuary for Japanese aviators. To the enemy, the psychological shock was unbearable. There was no longer safety in night skies. They were being stalked by invisible predators. By late 1944, the final proof of technological defeat emerged. The Japanese resorted to kamikaze tactics. This desperate shift from warriors seeking victory to pilots seeking only meaningful death was an admission of hopelessness. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, father of the kamikaze program, would privately confess the truth. Suicide missions were not born of honor, but of necessity. Japan's pilots could no longer hope to win. By late 1944, conventional combat against Corsairs and Hellcats had become impossible. The exchange ratio now stood at 15-1 in America's favor. Japanese pilots no longer dreamed of victory. Rather than die pointlessly in hopeless dogfights, they sought to die with purpose, hurling their aircraft at American ships in kamikaze attacks. For U.S. aviators, the Corsair turned the skies into a battlefield of overwhelming dominance. Major Gregory "Pappy" Boyington, commander of the famed Black Sheep Squadron, scored 22 of his 26 victories in Corsairs in just 84 days. These staggering tallies were not the result of skill alone, but of machines that transformed average pilots into aces. Even Japan's best flyers admitted the truth. American pilots were not merely better trained, they were equipped with weapons that erased any hope of parity. The machine had become more important than the man, a complete reversal of Japan's pre-war doctrine that exalted individual skill above all else. The Corsair itself embodied American industrial might in its purest form. More than 12,500 were built during the war, greater than Japan's total fighter production between 1942 and 1945. Each one was a masterpiece of industry: 13,000 pounds of aluminum, 1,000 pounds of steel, 18 miles of electrical wiring, and over 2,000 instruments and controls. At its heart roared the Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp, a marvel of engineering with 2,800 cubic inches of displacement, 18 cylinders, and advanced supercharging. It produced power at tolerances so precise that Japan's industry could not hope to replicate it, even if one were captured intact. While Japan scraped the bottom of its manpower reserves, sending barely trained teenagers to their deaths, America mass-produced pilots with the same efficiency. It mass-produced planes. The U.S. Navy trained 60,000 aviators during the war. Each received an average of 600 hours of flight instruction, 200 of them in advanced fighters. By the time they arrived in the Pacific, American pilots had already fired more ammunition in training than most Japanese pilots would fire in combat. They studied gun camera footage, dissected combat reports, and adapted their tactics continuously. Japan's once elite training pipeline, which had taken years to forge masters of the air, had collapsed into futility. By 1945, new Japanese pilots arrived at the front with barely 100 hours in the cockpit, completely unprepared to face American veterans flying the most advanced fighters in the world. Most of Japan's late-war pilots arrived at the front with no meaningful preparation. Many had never fired their guns in training, never practiced high-altitude combat, never experienced high-speed dives. Against such inexperience, the Corsair's evolution into a fighter bomber in 1944 added yet another dimension of terror. Now it could not only sweep the skies clear, but also deliver bombs, rockets, and napalm with devastating accuracy. Airfields, shipping, and infrastructure burned under its onslaught. The Corsair's multi-role flexibility meant it could appear anywhere at any time in any role. For Japanese commanders, this created not only tactical terror, but strategic uncertainty. Saburo Sakai, Japan's most famous surviving ace with 64 victories, later admitted that the Corsair symbolized the war's hopelessness. It wasn't just the aircraft itself, but what it represented. America could build thousands of such machines, while Japan struggled merely to maintain its aging designs. Sakai explained that survival against Corsairs demanded one thing above all: avoidance. When Japanese pilots spotted the bent gull wings, they dove for the deck, fled into clouds, or refused combat entirely. This was not cowardice, but recognition of reality. To fight a Corsair in a Zero had become suicide. By early 1945, the numbers told the story of total annihilation. Corsairs claimed over 2,100 aerial victories for just 189 combat losses, an 11-to-1 kill ratio. Yet even these figures understated the psychological collapse. Many Japanese aircraft never fought at all, fleeing at first contact. Others were destroyed on the ground by marauding Corsair squadrons. Pilots increasingly refused to take off if Corsairs were reported overhead. The final insult came not from combat, but from production. In 1945 alone, the United States produced nearly 8,000 fighters of all types. Japan managed barely over 1,000, most of them already obsolete by 1942 standards. The Corsair's production line alone outproduced Japan's entire aviation industry. The industrial war had been decided, and the bent-wing bird was its most lethal symbol. The Corsair's dominance did more than win battles. It shattered the very foundation of Japanese military culture. The cherished concept of Yamato Damashi, the warrior spirit said to overcome all material disadvantages, collapsed when skill and courage proved powerless against overwhelming technological superiority. The greatest Japanese ace, flying the most finely tuned Zero, stood no chance against an average American pilot in a Corsair. With that, the philosophy that had guided Japanese military training since the 1930s dissolved before their eyes. The Battle of Okinawa, from April to June 1945, provided the Corsair's final and most decisive demonstration of supremacy. Operating from both escort carriers and newly captured airfields, Marine and Navy squadrons established absolute air dominance over Japan's last major stronghold outside the home islands. The numbers tell the story. Corsairs flew more than 15,000 combat sorties, claimed over 500 aerial victories, and dropped thousands of tons of bombs and rockets. Japanese pilots, many with fewer than 30 hours of flight training, were destroyed in seconds, often before they could even fire their guns. As American forces prepared for the planned invasion of Japan itself, Japanese leaders confronted a grim reality. They calculated that the Americans could unleash more than 5,000 Corsairs from carriers and captured airfields, while Japan could muster perhaps 2,000 flyable aircraft of all types, most obsolete, nearly all flown by novices. Admiral Soemu Toyoda, commander of the combined fleet, later admitted that conventional air combat had become impossible. The only strategy left was suicide. The Corsair had rendered traditional fighter warfare extinct in the skies of Japan. When the atomic bombs ended the war in August 1945, they spared Japanese aviation from its final annihilation. Plans for Operation Olympic, the invasion of Kyushu, called for more than 2,000 Corsairs to operate from 48 carriers and numerous captured bases. Surviving Japanese pilots later confessed their relief. That battle would not have been combat. It would have been extermination. In the months that followed, American occupation forces escorted Japanese officers to U.S. factories still producing Corsairs. At Vought's Connecticut plant, they saw production lines where a single facility built more engines than all of Japan's wartime industry combined. They learned that individual American states had produced more aluminum than the entire Japanese empire. Confronted with this scale, the former naval leaders finally grasped the truth. They had sent warriors trained for individual combat against mass-produced machines of industrial supremacy. The final statistics told the story with brutal clarity. Over 12,500 Corsairs built, 2,140 aerial victories, only 189 lost in air-to-air combat. Numbers that confirmed not just victory, but absolute domination. The numbers were undeniable. An 11-to-1 kill ratio, more than 64,000 missions flown, over 15,000 tons of bombs delivered. The Corsair outpaced the Zero by 66 miles per hour, climbed 1,000 feet faster every minute, dove more than 140 miles per hour quicker, and could fight nearly 4,000 feet higher. Its 650 caliber machine guns delivered 5 times the weight of firepower. At peak production, America built more Corsairs in a single month than Japan could produce fighters of all types. The contrast extended to training as well. American naval aviators averaged 600 flight hours before combat. By 1945, Japanese rookies entered battle with barely 40. After the war, Japanese engineers studied captured Corsairs with awe. Every system, hydraulics, metallurgy, electronics, manufacturing techniques, revealed a technological world they had not imagined possible. The bent-wing fighter that once haunted their skies became the template that guided Japan's aerospace industry for decades to come. American Corsair pilots, meanwhile, expressed complex emotions. Many admitted that by 1945, combat often felt less like battle and more like execution. Facing teenage boys in obsolete Zeros, armed with a machine that dwarfed their opponents in every measurable way, they felt less like warriors and more like technicians of industrial war. The Corsair had turned the duel of aces into a process, mechanical, efficient, and devastating. For the Japanese, this truth was devastating. The cherished belief in Yamato Damashi, that spirit and courage could overcome material disadvantage, was shattered. The Corsair proved that spirit meant nothing against technology, that courage could not defeat industry, and that the warrior code was powerless before the production line. Every Japanese pilot who faced the Corsair and survived carried the same grim understanding. We cannot match this. We cannot stop this. What began as a military failure became something larger, a civilizational revelation. Just as German observers of America's arsenal had once admitted their miscalculation, Japanese pilots discovered that they were fighting not merely a superior aircraft, but the concentrated expression of a superior industrial system. The Corsair was more than a machine. It was judge, jury, and executioner, condemning Japanese technology as inadequate, their tactics as obsolete, and their philosophy as dangerously naive. The journey from early war supremacy to late war terror, from confidence to desperation, from tactical brilliance to kamikaze sacrifice, was measured in every Corsair encounter. Each shrieking dive stripped away illusion until only naked truth remained. Japan had challenged an industrial superpower with warrior spirit and lost absolutely. Today, restored Corsairs still fly at air shows, their distinctive whistle echoing across skies once filled with fire. For spectators, it is a sound of history. But for those who faced it in combat, it was the sound of death's wings. To them, the Corsair was not only an enemy, it was a teacher. It destroyed illusions, forced recognition of reality, and proved forever that in modern war, courage alone is not enough. The Japanese pilots who feared the Corsair were not cowards. They were realists. Their terror was wisdom, born of the knowledge that bravery could not alter destiny when the enemy owned the sky, and in that fear lay the seed of transformation. The Corsair helped bury a militaristic empire and opened the path to a peaceful Japan, rebuilt not on warrior spirit, but on technological mastery. The bent-wing bird, once called Whistling Death, became not only the terror of the Pacific, but a harsh messenger of the future.